everybody. This is Anna and Brian from Amata World podcast, and today we have our next guest for XR episode, Henry Stuart, who is the co-founder of Visualise and Meta Camera. Hi, Henry. How are you?
Good. How are you guys?
Amazing. Thanks for
Great.
joining us today. Yeah, glad you can finally get on our podcast, and maybe you can give a quick introduction to yourself and your background, so our listeners know your story and where you come from.
Okay, yeah. So I am like an immersive purist, I suppose. Like my entire career has been spent in the world of immersive. So since 2006, I set up my company then straight out of university, and I started shooting 360-degree photography, and that's when I set up Visualise. And Visualise is my main company. It's immersive content production. So we do 360 videos and VR films. We do AR content production and everything under that umbrella of immersive content. And then I've got another company I set up in 2019 called Meta Camera, and we make 360 video cameras. So this is my world, like immersive content. I'm in a serious niche here, and I think, you know, since 2006, I think we've done something like 400 different immersive content projects. So, yeah, I know my onions, as they say.
Oh wow, you've been it since from the beginning. But I'm also curious, like, what was maybe your first exposure to XR, and like you said, right after uni, you decided to what drove you to start this straight after uni, like.
So,
what was the story that led to that?
It's quite a simple way it all started. Like, I love photography. I was really into photography. I did a completely random degree in biology, which I had no interest in by the end of it, and then took up my passion and was looking for ways of, getting into photography as a business. And 2006, I was looking on the internet and I saw these things called QuickTime VRs, I think they were called, and they were just these very basic little kind of QuickTime windows on a website, and you could click and drag and look around the photo. And at the time, it was just mind-blowing, this idea that you can have a photo that you can actually look around or kind of, direct your own action or choose where to see. And so I looked into how to do it, got into that, and so that was how the business started. It started with these 360 videos and virtual tours. And so we would do that for like schools and hotels, and I'd run around the country doing those shots. And then I started getting into these much higher resolution panoramas where you could get these little kind of mini robots that you attach to your camera with a long lens, and you'd set it off and it would take hundreds of photos which you'd stitch together into these giant panoramas. And these were called gigapixels. And so I started shooting gigapixels, and I talked to St. Paul's Cathedral, and I said, would you guys let me in? I'll do this giant picture and you guys can use it afterwards. And so I shot this picture in St. Paul's, and it took about 3 hours to shoot. And as it was shooting and coming down past the dome and all the way down, and by the time it got down to ground level shooting the next row, they'd opened the doors to the cathedral, and so people were pouring in. And so a lot of the shots that it got was like kind of someone's head, and then as the row went round, it would shoot the thin air. And so you had these kind of floating heads and stuff in the middle of this picture. And as a result, for all the wrong reasons, it got picked up by the BBC. And it was at the time the world's largest indoor photo ever, but also had these amazing kind of floating heads and body parts. And so it went viral. And off the back of that, then the BBC said, well, why don't you come back and shoot something kind of that we specify? And I shot the royal wedding in 2011 as this giant panorama, but without floating heads, luckily, really beautifully put together. And it was absolutely massive, this shot. And it sat on the homepage of the BBC website for a good few weeks. And that was really where I made my name as a kind of immersive photographer. And off the back of that, Getty Images picked me up, and I shot the Olympics in 2012. And that was really for me and the business, the kind of start of all the fun. Because around that time as well, 2012, this brilliant character called Jürgen Geertz, who was based over in New York, had started to 3D print these kind of rigs made up of disassembled GoPros, and these were 360 video rigs. So I got one of those off Jürgen, and I was, shooting with that, producing lots of 360 video, which we were using in things like iPad apps, so you'd move the iPad around with the gyro, and we used to call it magic window, like you were looking into a magic window into another world. And that was great. Everyone loved it, but it's quite small scale. But unbeknownst to us, at the same time, in his parents' garage, Palmer Luckey was there with a soldering iron making his first Oculus VR headsets. And then the development kits were announced, and we got one of these and realized that all these videos and all these photos that we've been making for years could be viewed immersively, like you could view them like you were there. And it became overnight this new medium. And then we started to go and see, we had a couple of these Oculuses in these kind of lunch boxes, and you'd go and visit all the agencies around Soho and London, these digital agencies and advertising agencies who just absolutely loved it. And so that was kind of where things took off, and VR was booming. And we were producing 360 films, for mostly advertising and marketing back then. So that was how it all started for me.
It's kind of like the whole story, just like starting from like biology and just like royal wedding, Olympics. This is like every time it's like.
Yeah, it's a really fun journey, and the beauty of creating content in terms of filming is that also it takes you to amazing places. And we've had some brilliant clients. We've worked with people like Google, the FT, the Economist. We've worked with charities. We've automotive clients, but like all over the world. And so it's just been so much fun to get taken around to these fascinating places. And that's what we were doing it pretty well. And then COVID hit, and I remember kind of over a period of a few weeks, each one of our projects lined up, especially all the VR films were all cancelled one after the other. So as a studio, we had to think about what we could do in that period, in that quiet period, to kind of get by. And so we started diversifying into a lot more AR at that point, and doing augmented pieces, and also through Meta Camera, when we started building these lovely video cameras, we started looking a lot more at the kind of live streaming side of things, and picked up an amazing project with the Eden project as part of the government's 5G testbed series, and we live streamed 360 content from the Eden project down in Cornwall for over 2 years through Meta Camera.
Oh, that's so cool. It's actually like, it's one of the ways when you can get like super immersive and get to the places you will never be able to go, as like probably we can touch a little bit about the Chernobyl VR that you've done.
Yeah. So this is a really interesting one. Like that, I mean, so we've seen the business change quite drastically over the years. From that kind of peak hype of VR, probably like peak in 2016, when it was all about marketing, brands, advertising. It was all about kind of being the first to do this or that. And then I think as there's been a bit of a reality check in terms of the consumer uptake of VR, we see more of our projects now are kind of from a more practical point of view. Like there's something real that needs to be shown. It might be hard to access, for example. It might be dangerous, that kind of thing. So one of those projects is for one of our favorite clients. They're called the EBRD, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. And they're this amazing company that invests in these giant scale infrastructure projects around the world. Things like, motorways and irrigation systems and power stations. And their kind of flagship project is what's called the new Safety Confinement Dome, which goes over Chernobyl's reactor number 4. And basically, after the disaster in 1986, the Soviets built what was called the sarcophagus to cover the collapsed reactor. And they made it out of very crude concrete. And by the kind of early noughties, like 2005 kind of time, it was really in quite a bad and dangerous state. And so the EBRD, along with some other partners, raised money to build this new safety confinement dome. And it's an incredible piece of engineering. It's this huge domed kind of arch, the height of the Statue of Liberty, which sits over the reactor number 4. And it's actually a very complex structure. It's not just a dome. It's also got these 2 layers to it, membranes, which allow it to be pressurized, and therefore radioactive particles and things find it harder to get through. So it's an active building. And then in February last year, it was hit by a Russian drone, which blew a 15-meter hole in it, and also caught fire along the inside of the insulation for it. And so a significant part of the whole structure is totally broken and needs a huge amount of work to it. And it's a lot of money to fix this, but if if they don't fix it, it's essentially as good as not being there. And so it's quite an urgent need. And for someone like the EBRD, they need to convince stakeholders around Europe, like very high profile individuals, about the importance of this, and kind of really transport them and show them. And there's no better medium for that than VR. You can put the headset on and you can transport someone right into the heart of some of the most damaged areas of the power station. We were up in the roof of the new safety confinement with experts showing us the damage. We went down into the control rooms for the reactors number 4 and 3 to tell the historical story, along with visiting Pripyat, the kind of ghost town near Chernobyl. But yeah, so that's the kind of thing which you just can't go there. I mean, there's no way you could have got there unless we had the support of someone like the EBRD, and they can't send any of these stakeholders out there to see it. So we go out there, we make these films, and then they've got an amazing asset then to hopefully raise money to do something good. And that getting out there itself was unbelievably hard. So we had to fly into Lublin in the east of Poland, and we got picked up in these amazing armoured vehicles called B7 armoured vehicles, and we had a security detail that was these guys from the front line who were on their R&R and just making a bit of extra cash. And they drove us over the border, and we drove up to the outskirts of the exclusion zone, which is now all a military site. So not only is it kind of dangerous and difficult to get into, but actually it's also kind of heavily militarized. And the hotel we were staying at was just all full of being billeted by the army as well. And we had to find a hotel that had a bunker, because it was very hard to get insurance to go out there. And the only way we could get insurance is if we basically promised them that we would go into a bunker as soon as there was any alerts. And the problem we found was that the missiles that were being fired from Belarus to Kiev went over Chernobyl. So every time they fired a missile or flew drones over to Kiev, we had to go down into our basement. And so we'd get woken up, you'd be up in your bed, and then you get woken up, you come down and sleep in the basement, and it kept happening, so you're yo-yoing up and down. And so by the last few nights, we just all slept on the corridor of the floor of the basement, just to get a good solid night's sleep. And then on site in Chernobyl is quite an incredible thing, because 2,000 people still work there. And when you're filming VR films, you've got some quite chunky cameras and kit to drag around, and your audio stuff as well. And we had a whole 16:9 crew with us. And so you get there, you check in, you get your radiation tests and your levels. You're given dosimeters to check if you're going to get a high dose of radiation. And there's a guy who follows you around with a Geiger counter who's constantly threatening to steal your kit and take it back with him if it reads too high. So I got paranoid and covered all my cameras with cling film and the tripods with it as well. And they had this complete mess of a kind of jellyfish I was carrying around the whole time. But then you go in and you have to get changed, and you get into these amazing kind of Soviet-era overalls where you take everything off. You just have to have white leggings on and a white vest, and then you get the next layer of white kind of cotton suit thing, and then another layer, and then you get this big big blue Soviet thick woolen jacket and a helmet, and off you go, and you go off down the corridors in Chernobyl, and it's mile after mile of these incredible kind of rickety corridors with the walls all crumbling and the tiles all clacking and moving as the wheels go over them. But eventually you'll climb through all these corridors and you go up into the roof spaces. Your dosimeter will be beeping hard. You'll turn a corner and there'll be this incredible view of something like Reactor Hall number 3, which is just the most creepy thing to see. It's a moment frozen in time. You know, the phones on the walls have the kind of wheels that you dial around, and there's really old radios still pumping out kind of what feels like old music, although it's probably not. It's just the feel of it all. Ashtrays everywhere, everyone still smokes inside there. It's all these little differences, but the place is just being kind of gradually managed down to be safe, but it's still, you know, a working plant. And yeah, a very, very odd place to film, but fascinating as well, and incredibly rewarding to go and visit. You know, I've always been fascinated by Chernobyl and read all about it, and never really dreamed I'd get to go there, especially not after 2022 and the war starting. But you know, it's going to be a really cool film. It's going to be a really fun film. But ultimately, we keep having to remind ourselves, you know, this is for the EBRD. This isn't me, you know, scratching my history itch. I've got to make this film do what it has to do for the EBRD. And the presenter of the film, Jonathan Wells, he's the head of video there at the EBRD. And he's directing this, and he's absolutely brilliant, very charismatic. And he leads the narrative on the whole thing. So when it's finished, we'll have this film that will go on a special VR app we'll build for the EBRD to allow them to easily demo this at their events and hopefully raise some money. And then I'm going to try and beg the EBRD that we can make an alternative cut of it, which we can enter into some of the doc fests and see if we can get it around the festival circuit, because it's just a uniquely fascinating place. The way that the locality around it has been taken back by nature, the kind of the frozen moment in time thing when you go into the school there and the swimming pool and all these other places, and you know, it's kind of like an awful museum on a scale that you would never be in any other place. So I feel like there's a lot of people that would be fascinated to see that. So that's my hope.
Oh, wow, I mean, that's a fantastic story. I'd love to hear more about it. I'm also curious because, you know, the whole purpose of that maybe project was to film the actual site itself for the EBRD. But how much of the, you know, you mentioned like the schools and everything else that's sort of frozen in time. How much of that did you manage to capture as well as part of the project?
Yeah, so like it was really good that the creative, the kind of idea behind the film wasn't just to show the damage. It was to talk about the whole story that led up to it and setting the scene. So so there were lots of areas that were already in the storyboards that you'd really want to see. And then while we were there, you know, we were in Pripyat, so we thought, well, let's go and see the Ferris wheel, or let's go and do this. And you know, there was no one else there, because I think before 2022, it was quite a tourism site, and lots of people would go to Pripyat, especially. I think the power station was still pretty much off limits, but so there would have been probably a lot more people around the place, and we had it all to ourselves. And so yeah, we did spend a decent amount of time capturing things, but there was still a lot more you could capture. The end result, the kind of end timings of the film be around 15. I think the final piece is going to be around 10 minutes, but we've shot enough footage to, you know, make a slightly different experience that could be a bit longer as well, which we might try and do. One thing I forgot to mention as well is that we wanted to get some aerial shots, and of course at the moment in Ukraine, airspace for drones is particularly difficult, but we've got quite unique permission to fly drones at the power plant and Pripyat. So, but of course, it's very hard to coordinate between all of these different troops that are kind of up in the hills or up on top of buildings or whatever. So they could never guarantee us that the drones would be okay. And a couple of times we'd throw these drones up into the sky. And when we did the drones, by the way, we didn't put the big meta camera, because the meta cameras are quite big, you know. They're very big sensors, big lenses. And so for the aerial stuff in Chernobyl, we thought it was too much of a risk. And so we just put these little kind of Insta5Xs up, which are, you know, amazing little things, really. But we put them up with a DJI Mavic kind of thing. And so we flew it up and we'd start getting our shot. And all of a sudden, you'd totally just lose connection to the drone. And it would just be floating up there in the sky. And you'd look around you and try and see if there was anyone that you could wave at. And eventually we'd get control of it again. It would be okay. And we'd decide not to fly over there. Let's try over here. And we'd kind of do that until we could find places that we could seemingly control the drone enough. All good most of the time until the last day. And we flew it out to try and get this last shot we wanted with these incredible kind of shipwrecks that were out in this lake near the power station. And the drone just suddenly, we lost control of it. And then it flew off into the sky. And it just then went off at 1,000 miles an hour. I've never seen a drone go so fast and so far. We never saw it again. It had just been completely hijacked in some way. So yeah, that was the end of that one. And luckily, though, we got most of the footage off it. There was only a tiny bit we lost. So yeah.
Oh wow! Yeah, it's just like if you're filming in the kind of, because you already mentioned that if you can't actually take back if there's certain like radiation like back home, if like especially the cameras, that's the reason why you try to protect your camera kit as much as you can.
Yeah, you've got to be really careful. You know, if you drop things in certain places, you're not meant to pick them up. It's pretty bad, but it wasn't as bad as I feared, which was good. You know, we also had this guy with us with this amazing Geiger counter, and you know, he was constantly sweeping the area and checking, and he'd occasionally find real highlights and tell us, you know, don't go near there. But I think we were okay, and all of our kit checked out at the end. We got it all back, which I was terrified about the Meta camera. Having to tell my business partner Seb that I had to leave it there would not have gone down well.
But I really like the idea that it's helpful for them, like to raise money to repair like the roof and everything. But I was wondering if, so for example, in the future, is there any particular problem in the world or like the place you really want to raise awareness about or like show what kind of like, so it's to connect it as well as like with Chernobyl, your creative masterpiece to like, there's action you can do and actually help it.
What you mean for Chernobyl in particular or other locations in general?
No, like are there any other that just like you kind of dream about doing but still have a possibility to?
I tell you, one of the ones that I thought was incredible, I mean, I think we love doing charity projects, and we did one this last summer for an amazing charity called the Worldwide Veterinary Society. And they have this project, this multinational project called Mission Rabies. And they go to these very impoverished areas in often Central Africa. We were in Malawi in the summer, and they vaccinate 75% of the dogs in each village they go to, and they carefully cut up the entire map into polygons, and they have all these teams of volunteer vets that come down, and they all go out, they round up all of the dogs, they go around with a loud speaker on top of their cars, and they round up all the villagers, and they have these big drives, they call them, and people bring all their dogs along, and they get all the street dogs and they vaccinate them, because the number of deaths of children from rabies dog bites in Malawi, for example, was crazy. It was like multiple per day. And so these guys have been eradicating this stuff. And so we did a film with their kind of CEO, this guy called Luke Gamble. He's like a British Steve Irwin. He's an amazing character. And he led this film and narrates it, and we got this amazing footage from this little village in Malawi. And then now he's got a series of those headsets all over their offices, and then he takes them out to these big fundraisers they do, and they get their money from corporate social responsibility budgets. And so they go and do these fundraisers with these big corporates who've got these budgets to spend for good. And by showing stuff in the VR headset alongside his talk, he can literally transport them there and kind of get them to really empathize with the need for this and the impact that these guys are having, because it's a massive impact. Like, it's a really great job they're doing, but like, there's so many videos out there, there's so many like other forms of media or photographs, so you just don't really take it in. But if you put this headset on and you really feel like you've been there, it's quite an incredible thing. And like, so I think projects like that are the kind of thing that we're really enjoying at the moment. Another one we did this last year was for St. John Ambulance, and we've done a piece for them which is a bit more interactive. It's this kind of VR film about these two boys who fall out, and then they get in a fight, and one of them stabs the other one. And along the way in this film, you're encouraged to make decisions. It starts off with kind of silly and simple ones, like do you go for a chicken or for a burger, and so on. But then, like, once the stabbing happens, you need to make decisions like whether or not you stay on scene, or if you phone the ambulance, or if you take a video for proof or something. All these different options, and then you're helped in learning how to do a tourniquet and how to understand how to help someone who's basically dying from a knife wound in front of you. And using VR like this, because the way this program works, it's called the I'm trying to remember the name of it now. Young Responders Program, and the way it works is that they go around to different schools all over London and all over the UK, and they set up these workshops, and they get young kids in, and initially they're not really focused or really listening very well, and so they give them this VR experience that allows them to see this kind of very gritty and real experience of something horrible happening. Sorry, my dog's making a hell of a lot of noise. I'm just going to kick her out. She's usually quiet.
No, it's so cute.
I was wondering
you can bring the dog as well.
It's all good.
So just like in the shot with the dog.
Yeah.
A little cameo.
Sorry, I've banished her now. But yeah, so these kids aren't really focusing necessarily right at the beginning of the experience, but once you put them in the VR headset and they see this thing and they start interacting and they see the results of what of the choices they've made and the kind of seriousness of the impact of this whole thing, apparently it really helps to galvanize them, and it really helps them to focus, and it just gets the entire thing off to a really good start. They're rolling that out across the UK. They've just invested in a whole bunch of new headsets, and they're going to be pushing these further. So and we're hoping to do more of a kind of series with them. So I think for us, like anything like that, any kind of more charity stuff that has really good impact is and if it involves traveling to cool countries, then all the better.
Nice. And I think there's a lot to take in, because you've said that you've clearly had a lot of experience working with so many different types of projects using immersive media. I'm just wondering if you have maybe for people who are kind of still very new to the space or trying to explore the space, do you have any kind of, what's your top advice to them, like maybe a quick advice that they could, I don't know, how could they even start with something like this? So if you want to start out in immersive content, and specifically in VR filmmaking, I think it's really easy, actually. I think, first of all, the kind of consumer cameras out there, like the kind of really small portable ones, are surprisingly good, and you can make experiments and first films easily with these cameras that cost kind of less than £500, which is quite amazing. And things like the Insta 5X, which is the really small one, it stitches really easily. It kind of stitches itself, and it stabilizes really well. So you could make creative first films kind of without much expense.
And then also the software you need to edit these things, you can just throw it in Premiere in terms of like, if it's already automatically stitched, you can take that stabilized footage, you can put it on a timeline in Premiere and edit it like any other video, as long as you kind of watch out for a few simple rules. But it's a surprisingly easy medium to work with. I think one of the key things as well is when you're making a film for VR, you've always got to think about what's the reality of how many people are going to see this. And if it's going to be shown to just a few people in a VR headset, probably not many. So how can you make a version of it that works really nicely on YouTube as well? Because, uploading what we call an equirectangular, which is the full 2:1 projection of a 360 video, is possible to YouTube, and then you can get an interactive 360 view that you can click and drag around. So, it's important if you're making these films and thinking about getting into it that you understand that, there's only so many headsets, but there's every man and his dog on YouTube, so it's worth doing stuff for that. But also, one of the things that people are really excited by at the moment is large kind of stages and screens. And with things like Alternet in Tottenham Court Road and Frameless and Lightroom, there are these huge volumes already. Those are the kind of premium end of the scale, right through to pop-up places like you can get through Igloo Vision, who do amazing pop-ups and installed spaces for immersive rooms. But it's a brilliant way of people seeing this content, especially for things like events where you can really draw a crowd and have a shared experience using the same footage. So yeah, I think if I was getting into it now, I would be getting a simple consumer camera and just starting to play with it and experiment. And because the tools are all within reach and it's not too expensive to get into. That would be my way of approaching it.
And do you have any kind of like last words or like future predictions? And as well, what's the best way for our listeners to connect to you if they want to find out more? We'll include all of the links to the description, but yeah, just like what's the channel? Okay,
yeah. So what I'd like to say is just looking forward to the future of immersive films. So I think that the future of immersive in general is really going to be about wearables. So I think if you look at the Meta Ray-Bans or the Meta and Oakley collaboration and how the next iteration of those is going to be with AR at last. At the moment, it's using AI to see the world and feed back to you audibly, and then there's going to be a simple UI on the screen. But really what we're excited about in our industry is where you have the ones with AR in them that tracks to the world around you, right? And allows things to be contextually placed. Now, that is a huge step forward. That's basically what Meta's Orion prototypes have been doing. And I think that that's the point where you will start to get towards something much more ubiquitous from the XR industry. Because I think, first of all, whilst obviously, my whole career is in XR, I still think there's a lot of friction to holding a phone out to do an AR experience or putting a VR headset on and isolating yourself from the people around you. Whereas, if people start wearing wearables more and they look good, they're subtle, and then they've got these powerful features like AR and stuff like that, then you see that's the stepping stone forward towards more things like VR films being accessible through later generations of those glasses. And that's where I think it's going.
Thank you so much. And yeah, I'm glad you joined us today. And yeah, hopefully we'll hear more and see more projects in the future.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for joining us. And to our listeners, thank you for listening up to this point. And have a great day. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.